Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of September 23, 2020. The proceedings are available via the House of Commons website. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officers. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. So, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee will now proceed with that study of trade between Canada and the United Kingdom, a potential transitional trade agreement. We welcome our witnesses today from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Steve Burrell, Chief Negotiator and Assistant Deputy Minister, Trade Policy and Negotiations. Sarah Wilshaw, Chief Trade Commissioner, Assistant Deputy Minister, International Business Development, Investment and Innovation. Doug Forsyth, Chief Negotiator for the Canadian-United Kingdom Transitional Trade Agreement. And from the High Commission of Canada to the United Kingdom, Janice Charette, High Commissioner for Canada in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Natalie Dubé, Minister, Senior Trade Commissioner, Commercial and Economic. And Aaron Fowler, Chief Agricultural Negotiator and Director General, Trade Agreements and Negotiations. Welcome to you all. Mr. Forsyth, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members. Thank you for the invitation to appear before the Standing Committee on International Trade to provide an update on the Canada-UK Transitional Trade Agreement and Canada's discussions with UK towards an agreement based on the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA. We thank the committee for its interest in this topic. As I believe we are all aware, in 2016, the United Kingdom held a referendum on its membership in the European Union, which resulted in a decision to leave the EU single market, customs union, and free trade area. That decision has clear consequences for the Canada-UK trade relationship. For one, the United Kingdom leaving the EU means it can no longer be party to the CETA as of the end of the Brexit transition period, which is December 31st, 2020. Secondly, after over 4 decades of EU membership, Brexit will bring about significant changes in the United Kingdom's trade and economic relations with its largest trade partner. Thirdly, going forward, the UK may choose to take new approaches to trade. These will be of interest to close trade partners like Canada. Canada and the United Kingdom have historically enjoyed mutually advantageous commercial relations. Both sides are keen to work together to maintain our strong trading relationship post-Brexit and to seek to mitigate the potential disruptions for stakeholders. In September 2017, when the UK's approach to Brexit was in its early stages, Prime Minister Trudeau and then UK Prime Minister May met to discuss how to strengthen our bilateral relations, including in the area of trade. At that time, Prime Ministers Trudeau and May pledged to seek as seamless a transition as possible for our trade relations. Soon thereafter, officials undertook a trade dialogue aimed at substantively replicating the CETA on a bilateral basis as an interim measure in response to Brexit. As the UK was still formally part of the EU until January 31st, 2020, it was not able to undertake new international trade negotiations at that time. However, it could discuss a replication of CETA. Our trade dialogue talks advanced in 2018 and into 2019. A number of CETA chapters could be converted to bilateral provisions in a straightforward manner. Others required some minor technical modifications. A small but important list of chapters required intensive negotiations to turn the CETA obligations into Canada-UK obligations. For these areas, we undertook targeted consultations with implicated sectors and have been keeping them informed of developments. In addition to providing these stakeholders with updates on progress throughout the trade dialogue, we have also been keeping provincial and territorial trade representatives informed via the Committee on Trade, or CIIT. As of March 2019, our discussions with the UK were quite well advanced. Then, the United Kingdom unexpectedly announced a plan to offer duty-free access on 95% of all of its tariff lines to all WTO, World Trade Organization members, in the event of a no-deal Brexit. As this change in approach by the UK would have significantly undermined the benefits of any preferential trade agreement between us, we paused these discussions. Over the months that followed, Canada continued to closely monitor Brexit developments. We welcomed the ratification of a withdrawal agreement between the EU and the United Kingdom in January 2020. That treaty established the current Brexit transition period, during which the United Kingdom continues to participate in the EU single market and benefit from EU FTAs like the CETA. Canada was pleased to confirm its agreement for this arrangement with the EU and UK, as it offered a longer period of certainty for our stakeholders. In May 2020, the UK released a new Most Favored Nation, or MFN, applied tariff schedule called the UK Global Tariff, or UKGT. Then, in June 2020, the UK decided it would not seek to extend the Brexit transition period beyond 2020. Just for reference, the withdrawal agreement provided the option of a one-time extension to the end of 2021 or 2022. Soon after these events, Canada proposed the resumption of our discussions on a transitional trade agreement that could apply from the end of the transition period. Mr. Ng and her counterpart, Secretary of State Truss, confirmed that officials should re-engage in discussions on an interim agreement for the end of this year, with the goal of avoiding a cliff edge for business. Both also agreed that we should look ahead to subsequent new bilateral negotiations to be launched as soon as next year. Despite COVID-19 restrictions, we undertook an intensive schedule of virtual discussions over the past few months. There has been very good progress, especially recently, and we expect to soon be able to announce a conclusion of talks. A number of steps would then follow to prepare to seek the government's approval for signature and to table the bill in Parliament for its consideration. This transitional trade agreement will not be like other trade agreements Canada has negotiated. It is an interim measure in response to the unique situation Brexit has presented, where a party to one of Canada's recent trade agreements, i.e. the CETA, can no longer be covered by its provisions. As such, Canada and the United Kingdom also plan to enter into subsequent new negotiations in the near term. Those future negotiations would be best tailored to our bilateral relationship, reflect the interests of the parties, and respond to any post-Brexit developments. Ahead of the launch of any new comprehensive FTA negotiation, the government will undertake consultations with Canadians and follow any policies in place for the notification of Parliament. Officials will look forward to providing this committee with updates on that future FTA initiative. Now, returning to the transitional trade agreement discussions, Madam Chair, let me end by saying that throughout the Brexit process, Canada has taken a constructive approach in seeking to avoid disruptions for our businesses. We have heard from a number of industry stakeholders, as well as provinces and territories, about the importance of maintaining a preferential trading relationship with the United Kingdom. The Trade Commissioner Service, or TCS, has been engaging with Canadian businesses on the implications of Brexit. The TCS has done this through a dedicated web page on Brexit for Canadian companies and in terms of direct client service. TCS remains committed to continuing to assist Canadian companies doing business with and in the UK. Whatever the ultimate outcome of Brexit, the United Kingdom will remain a significant market for Canadian businesses, and we will continue to work together to build on our strong trading relationship to grow our economies and benefit our people. Along with my colleagues here today, I look forward to your questions and our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forsyth. Appreciate your comments. I'd like to welcome Mr. Frangakakis to the committee today. I hope that you enjoy your time here. On to the Conservative Party. Ms. Gray for 6 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here. I wanted to ask, when this all started, looking at some type of an agreement, and we know that this has been in the works for several years now, what was the goal always to have some type of a transitional agreement, or was that decision made along the way? Did that change? So was it a matter of having a full free trade agreement, or was it always to have some type of a transitional agreement?
I think one of our constraints as we launched the negotiations was the fact that at the beginning in June or September 2017, and then moving forward when we launched the negotiations into 2018, one of the biggest constraints was the fact that at that time the United Kingdom was a member of the European Union, and so they were not able to engage in a full-scale trade negotiation. So the only thing that they were able to do was to replicate the CETA. And so from our perspective, it was very much a transitional agreement, and we had identified early on that we would like a full-scale bilateral to launch full-scale bilateral negotiations, but the United Kingdom was not able to do that when we began the process.
Okay, when you decided to
bring your speaker up a little bit closer. Yes, thank you.
Yes, okay, will do. Thank you.
Further up.
Further up in my mouth.
When you decided to pause the negotiation, where did that direction come from? Did that come from the Prime Minister's office or from the Minister's office, or was that based on recommendation from your department?
I think that was a decision that we took as a negotiating team when it became evident that they would not provide a good outcome for Canadian producers and exporters by providing all countries with basically duty-free access. There was no preferential agreement for Canadian producers and exporters, and so we decided to pause the negotiations.
So that was strictly an initiative taken on by your department? There was no involvement from the minister or higher to actually pause negotiations with another country?
We do have the mandate to negotiate free trade agreement in the best interest of Canada. Of course, we would inform the minister of our any decisions that we take along the way, which we did. However, we were at the negotiating table. There was no reason to continue if it was not in the interest of Canada.
You had mentioned in your opening remarks that you did a number of consultations with sectors, specific sectors, not en masse. And so, can you let us know what those specific sectors are?
Sure, mostly in the agriculture sector. We did publish a Canada Gazette notice that launched to seek views from people, from companies and associated stakeholders. The sectors that had the most interest were on the exporting side, beef, pork, and grains, and on the importing side, because of the nature of the agreement, dairy stakeholders would have had we have kept them in the loop as well.
So just going back to looking at the negotiations that were occurring, surely there would have been a sign-off from a minister to halt negotiations. So, did that occur? Did the minister sign off on halting negotiations with the UK?
We briefed the minister and the minister's office as we would during the normal course of business. They said there was clear recognition that from the negotiating team, and our recommendation was that we not continue the negotiations at that time. It would not have been in the interest of Canadian exporters and producers to have to compete with other these competitors, for example, producers from the United States and China that would have been had duty-free treatment into the UK.
Okay, so but my question was, did the minister sign off on that? Minister
was in agreement with our recommendation, yes.
Okay. And so why would other countries have continued on if the format was similar with other countries? Because now we know that other countries have deals. Many other countries have deals. And here we are literally at the 11th hour. And so why would other countries have continued on and we chose to hold off for so long?
I think other countries are going to make decisions that are in their interest. You know, at the time that the United Kingdom chose to offer duty-free treatment to all WTO members, certainly other countries looked at what we did, and they also paused. Maybe they didn't do it officially, but they certainly took a step back and then looked at what's in their interest.
Okay, thank you. Well, and thank you for confirming that the minister had signed off.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. I'm sorry your time is up. On to Mr. Sheehan. Mr. Sheehan, there you go.
Sorry about that. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation, and it was interesting. Yesterday, I had a Zoom call with some members of the United Steelworkers here locally, the 3 locals that are making steel, and the conversation of England did come up, as we know that England had a very robust steel industry as an example, but over time they had chosen not to be in the steel business. It's one of the things that sometimes you hear in North America, too big to fail, or you think that the steel industry will automatically always be there, but it certainly takes a commitment by a country that they want to be in steel and the aluminum business because other countries are outsourcing it. So my questions through to some of our negotiators, just to kick this thing off, especially since it's just fresh in the mind, about opportunities that there might be, and I'm using steel as an example that England does not manufacture, but what are the other opportunities going forward that we would be looking at negotiating and securing our current trade status and looking at perhaps new opportunities, for various industries from coast to coast to coast, through you, Madam Chair, to our presenters.
Mr. Forsyth?
Sure. I can start, and then probably we'll look to other colleagues to respond as well. I think that we have had a very successful run of trade negotiations and or renegotiations in the recent past, starting with the CITA. We launched those negotiations about, they took about 7 years, so about 10 years ago. The CITA has been in place for 3 years, has been quite successful for Canadian companies. During that time, we've also negotiated the CPTPP, and then very recently the CUSMA negotiations that all of my colleagues were involved in as well. And so I think as we look at the landscape of what's out there, I think we continue to look at interesting opportunities. We do have ongoing negotiations with the Pacific Alliance, with the Ukraine.
At what point should I?
And with India. Sorry, Madam Chair, am I not coming through clearly?
Yes, you're fine, Mr. Forsyth.
Okay,
Continue.
sorry. Okay, and we have open negotiations with India that I think at this point we're looking around, starting to look at other opportunities. What's out there beyond sort of the big negotiations that we have recently concluded. I think that's part and parcel of some of the work that we're undertaking now within the department and within the government. And I don't know if my other colleagues would like to add to that.
I guess just in expanding on what you're saying and perhaps to just delve a little bit deeper into this. So basically what I'm hearing is that you the question would be, did you guys wait for the official completion of BRIEX before you started the process of negotiating or chatting with them? Negotiating, calling, talking. Were you doing that ahead of time? Were you able to do it ahead of time?
I think we had to. They had their referendum in June of 2016, and I think it was there was at that time some question as to how it would turn out, and then the United Kingdom needed to decide what they wanted to do after they got their they did get the result that they ended up with. So it and like any negotiation, it takes two willing partners. So by the time they had not had the competency to negotiate free trade agreements at that point, and it does take a little bit of time to develop that expertise and to move some resources around and prioritize that. So I think it took some time for that. I think that they clearly recognize the benefit of maintaining trade relations with Canada in some way, shape, or form. I think that's why in 2017, the Prime Minister May at the time, and then Prime Minister Trudeau decided that there was some scope for us to explore how we could maintain the trade relationship and to make sure that whenever they did get to the officially Brexit at that point, that we had something in place to mitigate those to mitigate the what would happen at that time. So.
And one of the questions I have too, as well, is we know that the UK has been negotiating agreements with several countries now, and they recently signed, I believe, an agreement with Japan. I'm also co-chair of the Canada-Japan Parliamentary Association, and I know that the England was negotiating and signed with Japan. But what else is England doing in regards to various things? I know the CPTPP that this committee had recently landed the plane on. England had tried to, at one point in time, get in on that because they had some islands in the area and whatnot. So could you maybe give us a little bit of an overview of where they're at with some of those other countries that they've been negotiating with?
Sure.
A bit of a short answer, if that's possible, Mr. Forsyth.
Okay, fair enough. So they have a couple of different streams of negotiations. They do have the continuity agreements, like with what we're doing with Canada, where they are trying to replicate their agreements that they have with the European Union as they leave that. Then they have another pool where they have actually launched free trade negotiations. So in that pool, I would include Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. And then, of course, they do have their major negotiation that they're doing right now with the European Union, which is about 50% of their trade. You're absolutely correct, Madam Chair, that they absolutely have indicated a strong interest. The United Kingdom has indicated a strong interest in joining the CPTPP. They have not filed an official application yet, but Canada has indicated that we would be supportive of their interest. So.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Savard Tremblay.
Oui, salutations. Alors, merci à la...
Yes, thank you very much to the witnesses, and thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like you to be as concise as possible. Generally, in this kind of situation, we have a lot of questions. Currently, we're talking about this transitional trade agreement. We haven't got to sign anything more substantive. Were we looking for a permanent agreement or transitional, or is the transitional agreement a fallback position because we weren't able to attain a full-time agreement? If and when we sign it, how long will it be in effect, and how long would you think it would take to get to a permanent agreement?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. We definitely see this, the transitional trade agreement, as an interim agreement first step. We have indicated early on that we would, replicating the CITA is kind of what we have available to us at this time, and in order to ensure that continuity for businesses and Canadian businesses and exporters and producers, we wanted to ensure that continuity was in place. But we identified fairly early on that we would like to launch a bilateral agreement that best reflects the trade and the relationship between Canada and the United Kingdom, and that is part and parcel of our negotiations with the United Kingdom right now. Is how do we best move forward with that? When Secretary of State Truss and Minister Ng spoke in August, there was a clear commitment by both ministers to launch a bilateral negotiation once we completed the work on the transitional trade agreement. So we expect to do that sometime next year. And of course, in advance of that, we would do a full-scale consultation with all interested stakeholders. But it is very much the case that we would. The transitional trade agreement is an interim step from our perspective, and then we would have a full-scale bilateral agreement in place in the coming launch the negotiations next year, and then have it in place within a few years after that.
This transitional trade agreement, will it be in effect until you finally sign? Does it have an expiration date, in other words?
Be in effect until we do sign another agreement. That would absolutely be the case. It is transitional, but there is no expiry date. There would not be an expiry date with it.
So in the final count, this agreement could be in effect for as long as a replacement agreement, a bilateral, is not concluded. We shouldn't assume that it's going to be interim in a quick sense. I was reading the document that was given to us last week, and a simple copy of the CIIT would not be acceptable in the long term. So the transitional agreement is supposed to reflect or reconstitute, if you will, what is contained in the CIIT. Is that correct?
Yes. So the transitional agreement it is based on the CIIT, absolutely. As I mentioned, that was replicating the CIIT was the goal. It was what the UK was allowed to do under as they were an EU member at the time when we launched the negotiations, and that was very much the case that we would bilateralize that to the greatest extent possible. And so some areas were easy to bilateralize, others not so much, and then there were some areas where we absolutely had to negotiate clear outcomes on a bilateral basis with the UK. And so when we do conclude the negotiations and the treaty is presented, there will be quite a few similarities with the CIIT, although it will not be an exact copy and paste of the agreement.
Merci. Combien de temps?
How much time do I have left, Madam Chair? 1 minute. Wow. I have a number of questions, but anyway, in under 1 minute, let me see if I can find one here. Were there to be no agreement, Canada would, of course, have to follow the UK GT, the Global Trade, as they submitted it in June. Some of our products coming from Quebec currently are coming in duty-free, will be taxed or subject to tariffs of the 1st of January next. Have you analyzed any of the consequences if this were to be the case as of the 1st of January? What would be the economic repercussions for us?
So thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So yes, if we did not get an agreement with the United Kingdom by January 1st of next year, then yes, all MFN tariffs would apply for Canadian exports into the United Kingdom, as would their United Kingdom exports into Canada would also have to pay the MFN tariff. So our analysis indicates that about 80% of exports would be duty-free, going into MFN duty-free or UK GT duty-free going into the United Kingdom. Still, there would be some impact on certain sectors that where there would be duties applicable, and that is mostly in the agriculture and seafood areas.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much. Just following up on the issue of economic impact, could you table with the committee any economic impact assessment that the government has conducted on a no deal scenario between Canada and the UK?
Yes, I think we can do that. Sure.
Thank you. Could you also table a list with the committee of all of the stakeholders that you've been keeping apprised of negotiations since they first began?
Yes, we can do that too.
Thank you very much. With respect to having a sunset clause on a transitional agreement, I understand from what you just said that there is no plan for that. Was that possibility raised by either of the parties during negotiation?
I don't recall specifically anybody talking about a sunset clause per se. I think there was a clear indication by both parties that the recognition that this was a transitional agreement and that in some way, shape, or form, and we use different terminology, but in some way, shape, or form, there was a desire to have a different type of bilateral agreement. So recognition that that some things might not work as well, but as they could. But nevertheless, I think in the short term and as they transition out of the EU, that a transitional agreement could work. And I'm thinking specifically about some of the rules of origin that would work better in a bilateral context.
Just for greater clarity, then, it was never Canada's position that there ought to be an expiration date on the transitional agreement.
We never put forward an expiration date on the agreement, no.
And could you offer the committee an explanation as to what the difference is between a transitional agreement that never expires and a comprehensive trade agreement?
I think a comprehensive trade agreement, much like we have with the CITA, covers all kinds of areas. It covers, and it's in the context of the CITA, it is based on the fact that the negotiation between Canada and 27, at the time, 28 other members of the European Union. That's why we look, as we said we could replicate it. We would do our best to replicate it with one country. But yet at the same time, I think there are areas where we could go farther with the United Kingdom. As I mentioned early on in my remarks.
Just because I'm interested in this point of clarification. If the transitional agreement is going to be more or less a carbon copy of CITA, which is a comprehensive trade agreement, and if the transitional agreement has no expiration, so it could last indefinitely, what is the meaningful difference there between a comprehensive trade agreement and a transitional trade agreement that's a carbon copy of a comprehensive trade agreement that never expires?
As I was saying, they're not a carbon copy. There are differences, and there will be. We are working on some differences that will be material. That when the negotiations get concluded, then it will be available for folks to see that while it is transitional in nature, that there are areas that will be bilateralized sooner rather than later. So
okay,
it's not.
I know we have had a. Oh,
sorry. No, go ahead.
I was going to say we have had a commitment from the department before to table with the committee the definitions of a comprehensive trade agreement and a transitional trade agreement, respectively. I don't believe we've got that yet. Perhaps you could give us a sense of when we can expect those definitions to be tabled and whether we could expect them to be tabled before the end of the month.
In fact, I signed off on them not that long ago, so I believe they will be making its way to the committee very soon. Today is the 20th. I would hope they would get there by the end of the month, but I will verify when they will get to the committee.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you very much.
But they are on their way.
I know you had said that there would be some differences between CITA and the transitional agreement that's currently being negotiated. Does that include the removal of the foreign investment protection system in CITA, or would those provisions stand in the agreement that you're contemplating, the transitional agreement between Canada and the UK?
Those provisions will continue to apply. In fact, the United Kingdom has already approved them. They were one of the early I guess, countries in the European Union to approve the CITA treaty. So they are already they are one of the ones to do that. So that was an area where, at least in the transitional agreement, where there would be agreement that we could replicate.
And with respect to CETA, my understanding is that those provisions aren't yet enforced because the ratification process hasn't happened for each country within the EU. So am I to understand that in the transitional agreement between Canada and the United Kingdom, we would see a CETA type deal with ISDS provisions in effect for the first time?
No, there are no. They will not be in effect because there is it does require that we wait for all of the EU members to ratify the treaty.
So in the transitional agreement, it will still be contingent upon ratification of all the EU partners, and those ISDS provisions between Canada and the UK will not come into effect until all of the partners under CETA have ratified them. Am I hearing you properly?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forsyth. Before we go on to round two, given the fact that we started 20 minutes late, I had asked the clerk logistically if we could continue the meeting to 3:30 if that's the desire of the committee and if the witnesses can remain until that time. Does the committee want to extend it to 3:30? Is everyone in agreement with that? Providing our witnesses can remain.
Yes.
All right, everyone's okay with that? I'm not hearing any no's, so I'm assuming it must be okay. And our witnesses are able to stay that extra half an hour? Mr. Forsyth?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, sure.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Madam Chair, yes. I guess I believe that we all have other engagements that we will cancel as a result, but I guess I'm wondering if we started 15 or 20 minutes late, would it be possible to extend the meeting by that amount of time?
20 minutes or 30 minutes if you need, if you would prefer 20 minutes. I think everybody's okay with that. Let's just try and keep the opportunities for everybody to get their questions and the information that they require. So we'll do it to 3:20 to accommodate Ms. Medallion. All right, we will move on to Mr. Lobb for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, very good.
Okay, that's a relief. That's a relief. I just have a question to start out with. And one of the questions is in regards to a comment the Prime Minister made November 11th to Reuters in an interview. And he said, one of the challenges is bandwidth. The UK hasn't had to negotiate trade deals in the past few decades. So there is an issue of not really having the bandwidth within government to move forward on this. And so I know those are his words, and I know you folks aren't here to trip him up on his words, but it sounds to me like you guys were at the negotiating table when the news came out of this WTO standing, that you made the decision to back away from the table, and that was in the best interest of the country and the producers and everybody else that you represent. So my question to you is, to me, it seems like there's no bandwidth issue based on the fact they've negotiated all these other deals this year, able to do a deal with Chile and other countries. So I know you don't want to get into trouble here, so I'm going to ask you to answer any way you can. But in regards to bandwidth, is your observation that there's any bandwidth issues with the United Kingdom?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think it is fair to say that throughout our negotiations with the United Kingdom, and I guess beginning early on, it did take them some time to resource all of their negotiations, and they have been quite ambitious with their negotiating agenda. So I think it's fair to say that it did take them a while to get resourced properly, and then to go through their prioritization exercise to determine exactly what where their top priorities were. And then, so I think it is a fair statement that there certainly were at times when they experienced some bandwidth problems. I think that's probably normal, as you well noted, that one of the questioners noted they did have an ambitious agenda, over 40 some continuity agreements that they were trying to negotiate. They did manage to finalize a number of them. My understanding is they're still working at them, at another handful or so. And then they do have a.
So just because my time is tight here, you did mention priority, and it's ironic because that's my second question I'd written down here. And I just wonder, it's not a reflection on you folks here, but how can it be that the priority was to do a deal with the country of Chile with a microscopic GDP compared to ours, and yet we're saying it was on a priority based on the UK. So how can that be? Like, it's not a critique of you folks, but how can it be that Chile had a higher priority than we had, or are we just missing something here?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I can't speak to how the United Kingdom prioritized their negotiating agenda. It could be the case that they wanted to close some deals that, from their perspective, were easier than others. The CITA is a complex and very comprehensive agreement. It takes time to negotiate. I think they were taking some time to develop the expertise along the way, and then to get the resources in place to do it. But again, I think from their perspective, they were looking at their number one market is with the EU, and I think that's where they have devoted most of their resources.
Okay, now just because I am running out of time here, it's something that I asked the Canadian Chamber and the Business Council at last meeting. I asked them about consultation, and basically their response to me was, we send them emails and they respond by email. Okay, now I understand those are business associations or organizations, but if that's how their consultations are, I'm wondering, because I'm from a rural riding, I'm interested in how the agricultural consultations took place and how they took place. So if it was they asked you, or was it truly back and forth? And what were the asks? What's dairy asking? What's beef asking? What is pork asking? What are the beans asking? What's corn asking? Can you give us some insight on what they're looking at if we're having true consultation with ag sector? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We speak regularly with all of the sectors that have an interest, and agriculture is obviously an important sector for us, both exporters and so on the offensive side and then on the defensive side. We have regular channels of communications with all groups. We meet regularly with them. Yes, we certainly do exchange emails. We brief them regularly, whether it's their board of directors or in a group, and we give them updates on. We have a regular meeting with CAFTA, the ag exporting group. Speak regularly with the dairy farmers and processors, the grains folks, all of them. We have honestly, I have an open door, open phone line to speak with them when they call me to let me know.
So just one last question.
So I'm sorry,
am I out of time
Love.
again?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Love. On to Ms. Bedian, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of our panelists, Mr. Forsyth. I guess I'll pick up on a couple of points that have been raised over the course of the meeting so far. One of them relates to this being the 11th hour. Mr. Forsyth, I'm sure in your experience, most trade negotiations do conclude at the 11th hour. Often parties do leave the meat of their negotiations to the end, and that is not unusual, I am sure. Perhaps you could comment on that, as well as the fact that it is my understanding, and perhaps you could clarify, that the objective of our negotiators and your team is to conclude the best possible agreement for Canada in Canada's national interest, and not an agreement as quickly as possible. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that is absolutely the case. All of our negotiators, whether we're negotiating with the United Kingdom or any other country, we're absolutely trying to get the best deal for Canadian producers, exporters, and businesses. And frankly, you're absolutely right. It does. Many negotiations do come down to the deadline, the last minute. There are always difficult issues that are left to the end because because they're difficult issues. The easy ones are easy to get through and don't take quite as much time. And usually it ends up being key sectors of interest to either party that are left to the very end. So this case, it's no different. Some of the negotiations that we have had are very much around key sectors of export interest for the UK and key sectors of export interest for us. So it's no secret that we want that our exporters, and in reference to the previous question, that our exporters of beef, pork, and grains see the European marketplace, but specifically the United Kingdom as key export opportunities for them. And the United Kingdom has been very clear about wanting to export more cheese to Canada. So I think those are the when we get down to it and how those products enter our market and how our exports enter their market are very much top of mind for us as a negotiating team.
Well, thank you, and thank you for defending the interest of our agricultural sector and our dairy sector. With respect to the transitional nature of the agreement, and a previous colleague and you exchanged a little bit on the possibility of a sunset clause. I personally, from my point of view, I believe a sunset clause would put us in a difficult situation, given that we don't know how long it will take to negotiate a fulsome, a comprehensive trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Do you believe that you will be negotiating a clause specifying in the transitional agreement when negotiations on a comprehensive trade agreement will begin, which might alleviate some of the concerns of my colleague?
I think so. I mean, this is a unique negotiation, I must say. We have not had one like this ever, and we have been at this more than a few years, where we're looking at trying to replicate something that is already in place, but it's not the greatest. We're trying to replicate something that's applicable for 28 countries and bilateralize it, if you will. And it's more than it's not a simple process at all. But that's kind of what the only option we have available to us in order to make sure that we can minimize or mitigate the potential damages for businesses. So we really wanted to take that and have it in place and then look to the future. And I think that as we want it in place for too long, no sunset clause, but certainly there are, as I said earlier, there is a keen interest on both from both parties to make sure that we do have a bilateral agreement in a timely manner. So that's why we have said that we would launch, and ministers have said that we would launch within a year and then look to conclude as soon as possible. I don't think we want to drag this out beyond a couple of years.
Thank you. And perhaps
1 minute remaining, Mr. Dye, 1 minute, please.
A quick question then. You indicated earlier, Mr. Forsyth, that a Gazette notice was issued. I believe that was at the beginning of negotiations. Just for the record, can you indicate when the Gazette notice was issued?
It was issued in July of 2018.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forsyth.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you'll allow me to read an extract of the document that we received last week. It's a section on questions and answers. Will Canada make concessions as to supply management sectors under the agreement? We shall continue to defend supply management systems or sectors and not concede supplementary or further concessions in the agricultural sector. Now, this has been repeated ad nauseum, but very often it has slipped off the table. In the process of negotiation, of course, we would learn eventually that there were breaches in the supply management system. We allowed more access to the products, commodities, whether it was poultry or whether it was dairy. Do we have something that is fireproof, cast iron, that there will be no further losses or leakage of the supply management system in this newer agreement or the transitional one?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. My mandate, my marching orders from from the minister and from the prime minister have been very clear that there would be no increase in market access for supply managed products coming into Canada, and we have been very clear at the negotiating table that that was the case. I think that yes, there have been in the recent past, there have been some increase in cheese and poultry exports to Canada as a result of the larger scale negotiations. But just to remind that in the CITIT negotiations, there were poultry was not involved. There was an increase of some of cheese exports into Canada. But again, we have been very clear with the United Kingdom throughout the negotiating process, and again at my level, at Steve Hughes' level, at the minister's level, and at the prime ministerial level, that there would be no increase in market access for supply managed products into Canada in this agreement.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Blake.
Thank you very much. And when you say there'll be no increase in market access to for foreign dairy, does that also include not reducing the tariff rate in the event that a country exceeds its TRQs? In other words, does that include ensuring that the tariff protections that currently exist wouldn't be reduced or eliminated for countries that exceed what's allowed under the current
rules? That's correct. If I understand your question correct, then you do have the correct understanding, if I could put it that way. Sorry.
Thank you very much. And could you confirm for the committee, I mean, we're talking about a deal that is meant to replace what's in place by December 31st. The House is set to rise on December 11th. That doesn't leave much in way of a timeline for Parliament to be able to pass enacting legislation. Is it contemplated that we wouldn't need enacting legislation for this transitional agreement?
Thank you for the question. No, you are correct. We would need legislation for the agreement, and there is not a whole lot of time left.
If your department was presented with a trade agreement of the size and scope that you're contemplating between Canada and the UK, and told to analyze it and make a decision about it within a couple weeks, would you say that that would be an adequate time frame for your department?
Would say that we have the expertise and the resources at our disposal to make sure that it was analyzed properly and be ready to move forward on that basis.
And so if it was a group of people without the expertise.
Mr. Abutaf, please, for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Forsyth. You said that this is a replica agreement, CETA, but it's not an exact replica. Can you specify where the non-exact is, in which areas, which industries, and which sectors? And is it on our side or on both sides, us and the UK?
Sure, thank you for the question. So it does have a lot of similarities to the CETA, and then there are some differences. So when I speak about where the areas of similarities are, I'm speaking very much about how it looks, the chapters, etc. So I'll just give you an example. So issues that can be replicated easily from the CETA include some of the institutional chapters, definitions, transparency, exceptions, trade remedies, customs and trade facilitation, mutual recognition of professional qualifications, etc. Areas that would require some minor technical changes from the CETA would include sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade, government procurement, financial services. And then the areas that require substantive discussion to bilateralize the outcomes would include market access for goods, rules of origin and origin procedures, and investments.
So when did you start negotiating?
We started officially negotiation, as I said, my remarks, Prime Minister's indicated in September 2017 that we should do our best to ensure a seamless transition. We launched the Canada Gazette notice in 2018, and then we started negotiations shortly thereafter.
So all the preparation that we've made so far since that beginning of negotiation looks like you're saying it's going to take another year maximum. That's your target within the 2021 in order to be able to get the comprehensive agreement. Is that correct?
In order to launch the negotiations, that's when we will officially launch the bilateral negotiations. I think it'll be, we would plan to begin the consultation with stakeholders sometime in the first half of next year, and then move forward seeking a mandate in the latter half of next year, and then sit down at the table with the UK shortly thereafter.
So do you believe that we are ready on this side, and you've got all the mandate to do that and to achieve that within the time frames that targeted?
That's a good question. I think my own assessment is that yes, I think the time frame is reasonable. I think once we get, we are anticipating some keen interest from stakeholders as we launch the consultation process, and I think there is a strong interest, as I said, from the on our side and on the UK side to get things done as quickly as possible. So I think it's a reasonable timetable. Yes.
Does it concern you that the Prime Minister is talking about the bandwidth on the UK side, that basically it's a negative signal when we're trying to put an agreement with a partner such as the United Kingdom? Does that concern you that it's going to delay the whole process and what your or your time frame that you're looking for?
I don't think so. You know, having sat across from the UK for the last well, I guess 2 years, you know, I think they certainly are, you know, they're getting more and more experienced. I think that will certainly help our bilateral negotiations once we get them launched. So no, I'm not that worried about any remarks about bandwidth. No.
So how often you go back and report to the cabinet on your progress on this?
We will get our mandate from cabinet. Presumably we get one next, as I said, the latter half of next year. That will provide us with the scope as negotiators to get a deal in place. If there are issues that come up during the negotiations that are outside of our mandate or that require further discussion with cabinet, then we would bring an item forward for them to discuss. And then if it's all within the mandate, then once we can conclude those negotiations, then we will bring forward a package of recommendations to ministers.
So based on your experience under normal circumstances, would you wait 6 months before you get any signal or mandate from the cabinet?
Well, we would have to wait, yes, for a mandate from cabinet before we launch those negotiations. Absolutely.
And you're talking 6 months. Is that the indication you got from the government or from the cabinet, or that's what you're anticipating?
No, it's just no. I haven't heard from the government or whatever. It's just the timetable that we have internally about when we have a reasonable expectation of being able to process the consultation, launch the consultations, process the consultations, and then get a mandate from cabinet.
So what triggered those?
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdullah. I'm sorry, your time is up. Mr. Raya, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the witness mentioned something about the implication on the transitional agreement dependent on CIIT being ratified by all the member states. Can you kindly elaborate?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the reference was around the investor-state dispute settlement and ratification of the CIIT by all EU members, and that the investor-state dispute settlement provisions under CIIT will not come into place until all of the all EU parties have ratified it, and they are not. They have not. All have not finished that process yet.
Okay, you did mention that negotiating this transitional agreement has been unique. So, what are the challenges you faced or you're still facing in negotiating this sort of fast-track deal?
Thank you for the question. So yes, it definitely has been unique. Usually we start from sort of the ground up, build up. You know, we have more than a few years of negotiating experience under our belt, and we have a certain way of doing things, and in this instance, we started with the CETA. And as I said in one of my earlier answers, that we started the CETA negotiations basically about 10 years ago. They took 7 years to complete, and they've been in place for 3 years now. I think over that time period, we've built on some of the provisions in those negotiations, and you'll see the results of that in our the CPTPP, and then in the CUSMA, the recently negotiated NAFTA 2.0. And so I think those are some of the areas where, if we were, or when we look forward to the bilateral agreement, those are the areas where we would see some scope for further elaboration, and that just wasn't possible during the negotiations with the UK, because they were very much part of the EU when we launched the negotiations, and so they had to do a CETA replication. So a little bit constrained in terms of what we would like to do, and that's why I think we're all looking forward to the new bilateral negotiations.
You mentioned that the transregional agreement and CETA, there are of course quite a bit of similarities, but you also mentioned there is a bit of differences with respect to the market access for goods and the rules on origin. Can you elaborate that, please?
Appel au règlement, Madame la Présidente, l'intervention de Monsieur.
The intervention of Mr. Aria could not be interpreted.
I will repeat this time slowly. You mentioned that the transitional agreement and CETA, it is bulk of it is similar. However, you also mentioned that there are some small differences, or big, I don't know, on market access for goods and the rules on origin. Can you kindly elaborate?
So for the the market access differences, so key areas of difference would be in the tariff rate quotas, and so we negotiated amounts for the EU. The EU is 28 members at the time, and so we would not expect that you would get that amount of a TRQ in one single country. So then it really comes down to, okay, what would be an applicable amount in a single country for like the UK, and how that calculation would come about. It's very much part and parcel of negotiation. And similarly for the rules of origin, think about those. It's the origin quotas, and those are products that don't qualify for tariff treatment, but we negotiated a certain amount that could enter the European Union, and then it's just determining that respective amount for the United Kingdom.
You mentioned that you have sat across your UK counterparts for the last 2 years. Was it for the CETA, or was it for this, or was it for something else?
So just for this, in fact, when we were negotiating the CETA, the United Kingdom was not per se at the table. They were a EU member state at that point, and the EU itself does their international trade negotiations for the member states.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Hoback for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you, witnesses. Okay, I just want to go back to the timelines here. You said that you looked at the zero tariffs when they came that out in 2019. You did a notice, you gazetted it in 2018. So when you seen the zero tariffs, why wouldn't you, instead of walking away, why wouldn't you have just said, hey, UK, we like these zero tariffs. Let's lock them in. Let's do the deal based on what you put here today. Let's get this done and signed up. Why wouldn't we go on that route?
Certainly had that discussion with them at the negotiating table, and what would zero tariffs look like. One of the challenges when they released the MFN tariff and announced that they would make it MFN tariff free is that they would do that for everybody. So now you're giving our American competitors and our Chinese competitors also zero tariff. They would want something in return on our side. So it wasn't clear why we would lock in zero tariffs for them in return when they would have access to our market, and we would not have preferential market access into theirs.
But I don't get it. You could have secured market access for Canadian companies 0%. That would have made it our side fairly easy to negotiate. Basically, the other countries didn't walk away. They kept talking. So obviously, the EU must have been indicating at that time that, okay, this is just temporary to keep our consumers happy for while Brexit is ongoing, knowing full well somewhere down the road these tariff numbers are going to change. So why do we leave the table? Why wouldn't we just lock that in and actually say, hey, these are a good deal for Canadian exporters? You know, yeah, why wouldn't we just finalize based off those numbers? Because that's a good starting point, because now you're based off a starting point that they've created. And I guess the other question I have is, how receptive were they to Canada at the start? Weren't we in the top 4 of their priority to get done? And then how receptive were they after we pulled out and then tried to get back in?
I think it's fair to say that we've always been high on their priority list. How high? I'm not sure.
Do you think that changed when you pulled out?
I don't think so. I mean, we weren't the only ones that saw what they were doing. I don't think it was.
But there's other countries that didn't pull out that actually now have signed deals, actual deals that are secured and concrete. Now, I've been told by my contacts in the UK they would have loved to have done a deal with Canada off the start, because that would have meant a lot to them. But we walked away, and they could never figure out why. So, you know, wasn't there political reasons for walking away? You can't just say it was a bureaucratic reason.
I think it was not in our interest to continue with them when they're going to offer.
So what did you base that question? What did you base that off of? Like you say, it's not in our interest. I had 0 tariffs. Why wouldn't I lock it in? Why is that not in my interest? If I'm a wheat grower in Saskatchewan, I got 0 tariffs going into the UK. Why would that not be in my interest?
I think it's part of the negotiation. What are we going to pay for that? And were we willing to have 0 tariffs on all of our Canadian imports in return for to compete with Chinese and American companies 0% in the UK market?
Yeah, but I look at it and I say, okay, so you're offering 0% to everybody, so let's just lock that in. Why do I have to give up anything? Because you've already given it to everybody else. Why? I could have made that argument to any supplier. I said, hey, you're giving the same discount to everybody else. I just want to lock it in for a longer period of time. And in fact, I think that's what other countries have done, and we haven't. So, you know, I'm very concerned. And then, you know, looking at the timelines coming back now, you've missed your deadline. I cannot put this through the House of Commons in the time frame to have continuity to move forward into the new year, unless I ram it through like we did the USMCA. And how do I do that? So what kind of consideration did you have in developing your timelines with our British counterparts to say, you know what, if you want to actually have this for to be active at the end of December, we need to get into Parliament in October or November? Because I don't even think the House leaders have put any type of resources towards passing this type of legislation, more or less the Senate. So what part of that came into your equation? And was the minister's office involved and the House leader's office involved in helping you decide where these deadlines are?
I think when we re-engaged with the United Kingdom in August after the minister spoke, I think it was we had the timeline square in our view, and we were negotiating towards that. I think that
what was that timeline?
Negotiator, I think we clearly had December 31st in our sight.
So then the minister's office is telling us that, but then the minister's office is telling you and telling me that Parliament doesn't matter. Because if you're saying December 31st is your deadline, you're basically saying we're somehow going to pass this before December 31st without seeing it, without our stakeholders having a chance to talk about it, without any type of oversight or overview. That ain't going to happen. So that's what I'm saying. You've missed your deadline. I don't see how this is going to be done by December 31st unless the Liberals are going to pull something out of their hats, unless it doesn't need parliamentary approval. Now, there was some talk earlier on a continuity agreement. Is that dead, or is that something still percolating in the background here?
We get a short response, Mr. Forsyth.
Sure. I was going to say, I think the transitional agreement and the continuity agreement are one and the same. But we are talking about the same thing.
Okay. All right, on to Mr. Sarai for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to give maybe Mr. Forsyth a break, I can ask somebody else, perhaps Mr. Verhall.
Thank you.
I think his hand's probably pretty tired just holding the mic to his mouth. So I think he needs a little bit of a break. So my first question would be, But what industries provide the biggest opportunity for diversification and increasing our exports to the U.S., to the UK, sorry. So maybe if Mr. Verhal or someone else, if they want to step in, can answer that question.
Well, I think in terms of the best opportunities, you may be back to Mr. Forsyth to answer that question. He's most familiar with that, unfortunately, although we do have a representative from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada as well who can speak to the specifics around the agriculture sector.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I'll take a run at it while
You're on mute, Mr. Fowler. Can you unmute yourself?
I'm not on mute according to my...
Yeah, we can hear you now.
There you are. Now it's good. Thank you.
Yes, so we would be of the view that there are extensive opportunities available for agricultural exporters and Canada's agriculture, food, fish and seafood sector in the United Kingdom market, both as a result of maintaining continuity in terms of market access via a transitional arrangement, and then over the longer term with respect to what we would obtain hopefully in a permanent FTA. The United Kingdom is Canada's 11th largest destination market for agriculture, food, and fish and seafood exports globally. We've exported a little over $550 million to that marketplace over the last couple of years. It's one that is particularly attractive to the grain sector, as Mr. Forsyth previously mentioned. It's one that our red meat sector has identified as a key growth market for them in the European space. They have significant interest in that market, as do a wide range of other primary agricultural producers, commodity groups, and value-added food processing industries that they have communicated to us. So across the, I wouldn't know where to rank it against non-agricultural interests, but I do see the UK market as one of significant opportunity for agriculture and food.
Thank you. The U.S. is one of Canada's biggest competitors in trade with the UK. With the new U.S. administration coming in, might we see an increase in interest on their market? And if so, how could we mitigate any negative consequences towards Canadian firms? And I'll let any one of you answer that.
Perhaps, Madam Chair, I can chip in on this. It's Jana Charette. I'm the High Commissioner for Canada here in the United Kingdom, and it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I think that certainly we are seeing here in the United Kingdom, from our perspective in London, that the United Kingdom is very interested in exploring the opportunity for an independent trade policy, which they will have more flexibility and more control over their trade policy after they have left the European Union. Now, of course, they're in a transition period now, and as of January the 1st, they will be fully out of the European Union, out of the transition period. And so they have launched negotiations, as Mr. Forsyth was saying. They've got, obviously, the negotiations with the EU as a priority. The continuity agreements are these transitional agreements with parties who already have an agreement with the European Union, but they have identified the United States, Australia, and New Zealand as really priority targets for bilateral trade negotiations. We know, having been through the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, that Mr. Verhul knows better than all of us that the challenges of negotiating with such a significant trade partner, and also with the political events in the United States, that will also have an impact on the timing of negotiations. But I think really what our objective here is in the UK is to be able to support Canadian businesses, Canadian exporters, to pursue whatever market opportunities that they choose to do so here. And we have a trade commissioner service. My senior trade commissioner, Natalie Dubé, is also with us this afternoon and can talk about some of those services. But really, I think the objective is make sure we have the right framework in place. That's what a continuity or a transitional trade agreement will provide, the continuity of the benefits that we have through the CITA, and then really to be able to promote the opportunity of the UK as a business destination, and make sure that we're supporting the development of those business relationships and really kind of being ahead of the game. And I think that's really our strategy here in terms of trying to make sure that we have solidified our advantages here in this marketplace.
Thank you very much, Ms. Charette. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Oui, merci.
Thank you. I'd like to read you another extract from the document that we received last week. Canada and the UK are negotiating a transitory bilateral agreement ahead of a bilateral agreement. Things are going well except for minor technical problems. We have to obtain results which are appropriate. So I think that the basic underlying reasons to leave it to the market. So can we have an explanation of what you mean by let the market forces reign?
Whoever would like to answer that.
So I guess I can take a shot, Madam Chair. I'm not clear what the reference is to, but nevertheless, I think the earlier part of the question is perhaps more pertinent, and I would just say that towards the end of the negotiations are always difficult, and there were a number of issues that were still at play. I think when that in the last week or so that needed to be determined, and part of it was around market access writ large, but specifically how we administer our tariff rate quotas and how the United Kingdom would administer their tariff rate quotas. And again, I think I mentioned in my remarks that towards the end of a negotiation, these are the more difficult aspects that get decided last, and the ones that have where each country has the strongest interest. And so I think that's certainly the case here with the United Kingdom, and that's why those issues were left to the end.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Mr. Blakey.
Thank you. So I take it by Canada's decision to walk away when the UK announced that there would be a no tariff position applied to national actors, that Canada was surprised by that announcement. And I'm just wondering, given that we've already seen that the UK can be surprising in trade negotiations as a relatively new entrant on the scene, I'm just wondering what leverage Canada would have if the transitional agreement doesn't have any kind of sunset clause in it, and the UK decides that it is actually satisfied with the terms and conditions under the transitional agreement. How would Canada get them back to the table if they have a change of heart?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I think there are aspects of the agreement that do have I wouldn't call them sunset clauses, but they will more or less compel the United Kingdom to have a strong interest in wanting to finalize and to move forward and then to finalize a new bilateral agreement with Canada. So I'm not too concerned about the transitional agreement stretching on into forever.
Okay, and I guess as parliamentarians, we can't evaluate that because we've yet to see the agreement and we've yet to see the implementing legislation. I suppose we'll have to be very quick studies if we're to conclude something before December 31st. I share Mr. Hoback's skepticism about the possibility of that. You have also said quite clearly that the ISDS provisions would be contingent upon ratification by all EU members. Are there any other aspects of the deal where the implementation of this transitional agreement would depend upon the approval or ratification of EU member states?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. On to Ms. Gray for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it's obvious that we have questions that the officials aren't quite able to answer for us today, and we've heard that direction has been given by the Minister and that this has to come to Parliament. So it's really appropriate to have the Minister here at committee so that we can ask some questions. And I know that when the Minister was here a few weeks ago, she was very receptive about coming back to committee, which was really great. So I move that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, that the committee invite invite the Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade to appear before the committee at any time that accommodates her schedule before December 4th, 2020, for a meeting of 2 hours on the subject of a potential transitional trade agreement between Canada and the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gray. Would you like us to, is there debate on the motion that Ms. Gray has put forward?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Blakey and then Ms. Bendayan.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to express my support for the motion, and one of the reasons why is that I do think, and it's been the subject of some conversation already today, that the parliamentary timelines with respect to a deal are a very real constraint, and you know, I appreciate the work of our civil servants, but I also appreciate that they're not in a position to speak to House business in the way that a Minister of the Crown would be. And I think it is important for the committee to try and understand exactly how the government imagines shepherding implementing legislation for such a deal through the House in time for the deadline. And I think the minister would be uniquely qualified to speak to that among representatives of the department, because I don't think that's something we can expect to get answers from departmental officials on. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's important that we invite the minister to speak to this issue, and it's one of the reasons why I'll be supporting this motion.
Ms. Bendayan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree on you know, the importance of hearing directly from the minister, and of course, my colleague Ms. Gray is right that the minister did indicate that she would be open to coming back anytime that this committee you know, thought it would be necessary. I just wanted to perhaps flag that given that we are Friday afternoon at this point, we are looking, if we take the exact wording of Ms. Gray's motion, at the minister coming in the next essentially 9 days. If we look at the working days left in the calendar before December 4th. So I just wonder, would it be possible to amend the deadline of December 4th so that we can ensure that we meet the wording of the motion? I would suggest perhaps that we include the week of December 7th.
Excuse me, Ms. Bendayan, you need to open your camera.
I seem to have technical problems. There is a message saying that you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. So if the host can unstop it.
Give us a second to see what's happening.
Thank you, host. So as I was saying, my proposal would be therefore to indicate you know, by latest December 11th, or so just to give us the opportunity to hear from the minister you know, before the House rises, obviously, but I would just like to give us all of the opportunity possible to have the minister come, and providing 9 days with which to work with the minister's schedule might prove difficult.
Okay, I have Mr. Lobb, Mr. Franchikatis, and then, oh, okay, I'm not quite sure yet how this participants listing works, but I had Mr. Lobb down first. Okay, Mr. Lobb?
Madam Chair, I don't think I had my hand up,
okay.
So I'll pass to
the
next person on the list.
Yeah, I am. Sorry. Okay, Mr. Hoback.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, but we're running out of time, Ms. Bendayan, and through you, Chair, to Ms. Bendayan. We don't have time to wait. And the minister, I know she's busy. She's got too many things in the air right now, and it's actually, she should have, there should be 2 people in her job. And that's not a criticism of her, it's reality. She's trying to balance small and medium enterprises and trade needs a full-time person right now, and we don't have that. So I'm sorry that this could be inconvenient to your schedule, but If she thinks this is going to be passed by December 31st, well, how do we do that unless she's in here next week? And the concern I really have is she's given direction to the negotiators that December 31st is the deadline. So she's basically saying that there is not going to be any parliamentary oversight. She's basically telling us here that either we're all coming back the week of Christmas to do this, or I'm not sure if December 31st is their deadline. That means we're coming back when? I don't know. But there's been no consideration for parliamentary oversight or for anybody to scrutinize the actual document. The other thing that's really concerning me, Madam Speaker or Chair, is there's been no consultations. And this agreement actually looks to me like it be a full-fledged trade agreement. There is no sunset. There is no trigger mechanism to say, okay, by 2022, this will be changed over to an actual agreement. There's no game plan laid out other than we're going to all be nice people and actually go to the table sometime next year. He may not even get a mandate letter next year to actually proceed with negotiations. So these types of questions the minister has to answer. And she has to answer them now.
Mr. Blakey and then Mr. Sheehan. Okay, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo some of the concerns around timing. I mean, I have to say that if it is really a priority of the government and of the minister to have some kind of implementing legislation passed by the end of December, I think the minister has to be able to make it a priority to appear swiftly before this committee. And if the minister can't be bothered to come until December 11th, then I don't think that this is a priority of the government. In which case, we're not gonna see anything happen before the end of the year anyway. So I'm disinclined to change the timeline of the motion.
Me? Madam Chair, did you call my name?
Yes, Mr. Sheehan. If whenever you want to speak, if you could be raising your hand there, it just makes it a little bit easier for the person who's operating this. I got you, Mr. Sheehan. Please go ahead.
No problem. I tried that little reaction button, but you probably didn't see it, so I'll use my hand. It looks enormous here, but to the point on the what is being discussed today, and I was just looking at the original motion that we have before us that was adopted, and it talks about a study of 3 meetings, and that we're to get on and study this with a transitional agreement with the United Kingdom being in place by December 31st, 2020. So the dates, I agree with my colleague, the parliamentary secretary, that the date should be flexible. I think it's in keeping with the original motion that we all agreed to with those timelines. I would ask too as well, perhaps just for perhaps maybe a little bit of smoothness for up to 2 hours, because whatever that amount of time that the minister can get here. I know we're all busy. We're all busy parliamentarians with a lot of things. The minister is very, very busy, but she has said she would like to come back too as well. So I think that having some flexibility in doing it, I think that the minister is going to try and get here to satisfy the original motion as well. But also with an up to 2 hours and before this date. And if she can get here earlier, great. But if not, I still feel that the original motion that was adopted by all of us would be satisfied with what the parliamentary secretary has suggested. So thank you.
Ms. Bedian and then Ms. Gray.
Thank you. I guess just to add to my previous comments, we on the government side are certainly optimistic about concluding an agreement. I hope that the officials were able to clarify that today. And I think it would be most useful for the minister to come once the committee has a document before it. And therefore, I am sympathetic to Mr. Hoback and Mr. Blakey, who are insisting that this be a priority of the government. It has been, I assure you, and the negotiators have been working around the clock in order to get this done. I would hope that we would make the most of the minister's appearance by being able to ask her questions on an eventual document, and therefore I do not think it's unreasonable at all for us to suggest, let us give us a few more days, and if she can come sooner because we have a document sooner, then so be it. But given that the motion is going to be binding on the committee, I would suggest that we give ourselves as much flexibility as possible to make the most of the minister's appearance when she does come.
Before I move on to Ms. Gray, Ms. Bendayan, could you just repeat again what how you were proposing to amend Ms. Gray's motion?
Certainly, my proposal was to make the motion reflective of the fact that the minister could appear before the committee, on or before December 11th. I had suggested that we include the week of December 7th as a possibility for her appearance, whenever, of course, we are scheduled to sit as committee during that week.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Gray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking to the amendment, we can certainly have the minister come back once we have a document, which could be normal process, as considering this has to go to Parliament and then come back to the committee. So we could certainly have the minister back again. I'm not prepared to vote for the amendment for this. We've got to look at the timing of this. We have questions that aren't being answered, and because the officials here just simply may not be privy to them. So we're looking at a very tight timeline. I know that we're all busy, as one other member had said, but I'm prepared to be here at 5 a.m. or at midnight. We're talking about one of our largest countries that we have trade with, and this is incredibly important. We could have been doing this during the time period when the government prorogued Parliament. So we're in this position because of a lot of decisions, time-wise, that this government has made, and so I think that we need to work on this expeditiously.
Mr. Blakey?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I would just echo the comment that if the minister, that the minister can come more than once. And if this is a real priority of the government, I don't think that that's a lot to ask, particularly given that it's not the committee that established these timelines. It's the government that has created the predicament that we're in. And as I said initially at the outset of this debate, I think one of the important reasons to hear from the minister soon has to do with getting an idea of how the government intends the parliamentary process with respect to the implementing legislation to unfold. And that's not something as a conversation that, like, I don't want to spend the limited amount of time that we're going to have to be talking about the content of the deal, which we still haven't seen, and we're a month away from the deadline, and the content of the enabling legislation, which we also haven't seen and would have to be passed on the same deadline. I don't want to be spending that time talking to the minister about parliamentary process. I'd appreciate understanding from the government how it is they intend to try and shepherd this through Parliament in the time remaining before we're all submerged in these two documents, what sounds to me a lot like a comprehensive trade deal and the enabling legislation to go along with it. So, I mean, I think the minister should come without delay, and I think that if this really is a priority of the government, when they finally share some of the details of what's in this agreement, she can come again.
Ms. Bendayan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take the opportunity to respond to a couple of things that have been said, and I appreciate certainly that I might not be changing anybody's mind here, but the minister did appear approximately 10 days or 2 weeks ago, and at that time, members were free to ask the minister any question that they felt appropriate, including with respect to the timing of these negotiations and the introduction or passage of any bill through the House of Commons. And I don't believe any of the colleagues who seem to be interested in that today asked those questions. The other point that I thought would be useful to make was that the suggestion that there were questions left unanswered. I believe that our negotiators answered almost every question. The only question that I believe they were unable to answer was with respect to the House schedule, and I would suggest that the House leader and the minister responsible for proceedings in the House would probably be the person to ask that question of, not our negotiators. So again, I do.
We'll vote on the amendment first.
I'm sorry? You're muted, Madam Chair.
Continue, I'm sorry.
Okay. I again would suggest that it would be certainly of interest to me to hear from the minister, and that delaying by a few days her appearance would only increase the utility of the meeting. And I would suggest that we will hopefully have a document before us at that time, and therefore spending 2 hours with the minister in order to ask the questions that we have both on the document and on the procedures through the House would be entirely possible and appropriate.
Okay, Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if we can call for the vote, both for the amendment and then for the motion.
Okay.
And will that be a
Okay,
recorded vote, Madam Chair?
Okay, just 1 second, if you desire. But I have Mr. Drouin on the list.
Excusez-moi, j'ai manqué le...
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the amendment. Could it be repeated, please? I didn't hear what the sub-amendment was.
Merci à mon collègue qui est
Thanks to your colleague. I'd like to thank my colleague. I don't believe so, Madam Chair. Can you hear me now? All right. It's an amendment, not a sub-amendment to Ms. Gray's motion, which calls for essentially that we could have a meeting or have the minister appear in December, rather than specify the deadline of the 4th of December. This would give us the opportunity, and give her the opportunity also, to appear in the week of December the 7th.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick, Mr. Frederick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to see colleagues, and obviously this is not a committee that I'm a formal member of. I only sit as an associate member. I'm filling in today for Mr. Dhaliwal, but I've been paying very close attention for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm extremely interested in matters of international trade, and the committee that I sit on is the Finance Committee. And obviously there is a great deal in common that these two committees share, Madam Chair. I bring an outsider's perspective. That's why I give you that background. But to my way of thinking, just following along, I think the committee needs to focus on the positive. You've heard about the tremendous gains that are being made in terms of the negotiations. It's clear that that something is close. That's been
Point of order, Chair.
widely
Point of order.
in the business press.
Just 1 moment, Mr. Frederick. Hold on, Mr. Hoback.
Madam Speaker, you were in the process of actually calling the vote, so I think before Mr. Fragilakis can actually have the floor. Yes, I believe you were, because we were just looking for clarification on the vote.
Sorry,
then
Mr.
going to
Hoback.
vote, I assume. So if he wants to filibuster in the Finance Committee, I suggest he goes back to Finance Committee instead of doing it here.
Sorry, Mr. Hoback, it's not a point of order. It was Ms. Gray that asked that we call the vote. And when you still have speakers on the speakers list, you have to complete the speakers list is the direction I get from our very able-bodied clerk. So my apologies. On back to Mr. Frederick. Would you please complete your comment?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. To Mr. Hoback, I only wish him well. And what can I say? I'm not trying to filibuster anything here. I'm simply bringing a perspective. What I was saying was, I think the committee is needing to focus on the positive. I think we've heard very much here today about the gains that are being made, and Ms. Bendian's suggestion is one that's, I think, beyond reasonable to have a minister come in on a week of December 7th. I think the what was originally proposed by the Conservative member whose name is not coming immediately to mind here, I apologize for that. But, you know, I think December 4th was originally mentioned. Here, the week of December 7th is being mentioned. And I mean, the opposition is not wanting to bend at all on that. I think if the spirit of minority government and parliament is compromised, I would very humbly ask my opposition colleagues to entertain that compromise. And to Mr. Blakey's points, he's brought up the point about enabling legislation a number of times here. How can the committee itself meaningfully engage the minister without legislation already presented. It would be an exercise in optics on the part of the opposition, I think. But I'll leave it there, Madam Chair, in case someone else wishes to add something to the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Franciscatus. Okay, I think we will go into, I have no other speaker. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Savard Tremblay is still on the list.
I would like to raise a certain question. If we adjourn or recess on the 11th of December, which is probable, if we're going in that direction and we really must have this meeting, given the deadline, which is our deadline, the committee deadline, I don't think that we should say, well, if we recess for Christmas or adjourn, that our committee meeting will not meet. Perhaps I'd like to get some clarification on that point.
Well, the House
Madam Chair.
scheduled to rise on December the 11th.
Si je pourrais répondre, Madame la Présidente.
Yes.
May I respond? Yes. If I'm coming through, I'll continue. Is this better? Well, I could modify my amendment to try to calm the concerns of my colleague. I could put the 10th of December rather than the 11th, so that we can be quite clear that Parliament will still be in session, and that we can, in fact, have our meeting. I'd be quite open to that.
Your amendment to Ms. Gray's motion that you are suggesting would be that the minister appear up to before December the 10th. Is that correct, Mr.
Yes,
Dyan?
that would be that is correct, Madam Chair. I think that would respond to the concern raised by my colleague, and I certainly have no issue with that.
That the minister appear before December the 10th. All right. Okay, Mr. Blakey, you'd like a recorded vote on this?
Yes, please.
Okay, Madam Clerk.
Okay, so on the amendment of Ms. Bendayan to replace December 4th by December 10th. Alors, sur l'amendement de Madame Bendayan de...
On Ms. Bendayan's amendment to replace December 4 by December 10.
Ms. Bendayan. Madame Bendayan. Madame Bendayan, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Ms. Bendayan, I think you're muted.
I apologize.
We're voting on your amendment.
Est-ce que vous êtes en faveur de l'amendement ou contre l'amendement?
Are you in favor of the amendment or against? Well, I will be in favor. Thank you.
Catus.
Favor.
I didn't hear you, sir. Mr. Fragiscatus, I didn't hear you.
In favor of Ms. Bendayan's amendment.
Mr. Sarai.
I'm in favor.
Mr. Sheehan.
I'm in favor.
Mr. Bultaif.
Against.
Ms. Gray.
Not in favor.
Mr. Hoback.
I'm against it.
Mr. Lobb.
No.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Au nom, je pense, de la nécessité de...
Because of the necessity to go more quickly, I'll just say I'm opposed to it.
Against.
Yeas en faveur 5, nays 6, contre 6.
Okay, the amendment does not carry. We'll now vote on Ms. Gray's motion.
Monsieur Drouin,
En faveur.
Madame Bendayan,
En faveur.
Mr. Fragiskatos,
En faveur.
Mr. Salai,
In favor.
Mr. Sheehan, Mr. Sheehan,
In favor.
Mr. Abultaif,
Yes.
Ms. Gray,
Vote yes.
Mr. Hoback,
Yes.
Mr. Lobb,
Yes.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay,
En faveur.
Mr. Blakey,
In favor.
yeas pour 11, 11.
Okay, carries unanimously. All right, apologies for the delay with the witnesses. Do we still have our witnesses with us? We'll go back to Ms. Gray for 4 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask that we had earlier testimony that the Prime Minister Trudeau had met with Prime Minister Theresa May regarding discussions over a trade agreement back in 2017. And I'm wondering when Prime Minister Trudeau met with Prime Minister Boris Johnson to discuss a trade agreement.
Okay, which one of our witnesses would like to answer that? Mr. Forsyth? Okay, Mr. Forsyth?
You're muted, sir.
Very good. Apologies. I think the system muted me for one during your discussion. So I think I'll start, and then I'm happy to turn to my colleague, High Commissioner in London, who might have some further information on that. The Prime Minister has met with the Prime Ministers have met a number of times. I think most recently last week they had a telephone discussion. So I'm not sure if you're looking for an entire list or if you're just looking for recent discussions. But perhaps I could turn to the High Commissioner for further elaboration.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to elaborate on that. As Mr. Forsyth was saying, Prime Minister Trudeau and Prime Minister Johnson have met in person on at least 2 occasions, to the best of my memory. One of them would have been in July of last year. So that would have been July of 2019. That would have been their first bilateral meeting after Mr. Johnson having taken over as the Prime Minister here in the United Kingdom. And it took place in Biarritz, France, on the margins of the G7 meeting. And at that point, they had a conversation about many topics in their relationship, and including the trade agreement negotiations. They've had a number of telephone conversations. The other in-person meeting that they would have had would have been in December, again, of 2019, when Prime Minister Trudeau was here in London for a NATO leaders meeting. I think that was a conversation where it was quite a brief conversation. I don't think they dealt in detail around trade matters at that point, but there have been periodic telephone conversations as well. And I think that in the readouts that the Prime Minister's office has provided, you'll see there have been periodic references to the discussion and around trade.
Great, thank you very much. And when we pulled out of trade negotiations in 2019, what month would that have been?
That was in March of 2019.
March of 2019? Okay, thank you. I know that there was a couple of references to the Canada Gazette for getting stakeholder engagement. And I'm glad that that was brought up, actually, because what's actually listed in the Gazette in 2018, it says the Government of Canada will continue to inform Canadians as it continues to actively engage the European Union and the United Kingdom in an effort to minimize disruptions from Brexit for Canadians. So this says it will continue to inform Canadians. So what part of this shows businesses and Canadians that we're engaging with them? Where's the outreach call in the Gazette here saying that you're doing outreach?
There's other parts to the Gazette notice as well. That calls for stakeholders to provide us with their input, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
But we have had active, as I said, active discussions. I speak regularly with interested stakeholders and provincial and territorial representatives, as do my colleagues at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. We have an active roundtable, if you will, of opportunities for people to engage with us. And as I said, our doors are always open to for stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gray. On to Mr. Fredriskasis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually going to yield my time to Ms. Bendayan, if I could.
Ms. Badayan.
Thank you, colleague. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess picking up on the point of consultations, Mr. Forsyth, given that the transitional agreement is intended to be based on the CIIT agreement, could you walk us through quickly the consultations with the relevant stakeholders and the private sector here in Canada that were done in advance of CIIT over, I believe it is a 7-year.
Actually, I think I might turn to our chief negotiator for those negotiations, who's Steve Huell. He would be better placed to answer that, although that was a while ago, but he would have the best memory on that.
Well, thank you. Our consultations with stakeholders, provinces and territories, civil society through the CIIT negotiations took place on pretty much a weekly basis, and certainly throughout the negotiations, any negotiating round, our stakeholders were largely with us, either in the EU or in Canada, and we met with them every evening during negotiating rounds. So the consultation process was very, very intensive and ongoing throughout the CIIT negotiations until the end. We also used that negotiations consultation network when we conducted further negotiations, including the new NAFTA with the U.S. and Mexico in part, but also for the continuity agreement that Mr. Forsyth has negotiated as well.
Thank you, Mr. Verhoel. And coming back to the decision that Ms. Gray was asking about earlier regarding a pause in the negotiations, and I believe it was March 2019. In your opinion, as negotiators, was that a decision that was in the strategic interest of Canada, and do you feel that it was an important one in order to ensure that we get the best agreement possible for Canadians?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And yes, I think it was we had been actively engaged at the table with the United Kingdom at that point, and we're getting close. It did come as quite a surprise, and we did, we had a thorough internal discussion on it. But as I said, it did come as a surprise, and the decision that we took after analysis was very much that it was not in the interests of Canada and Canadian businesses and exporters for us to continue with the negotiations at that time.
Thank you. And in terms of the discussion that we had amongst members not too long ago, without revealing anything, any information which you're not allowed to say at this time, are you optimistic regarding the possibility of concluding an agreement before the deadline?
I think it's fair to say that yes, I am quite optimistic. We have been negotiating actively since August, and I said very intensively in the last few weeks, down to the final issues to be determined, and I'm quite confident that we will have reach final conclusion very shortly.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, do I have time left?
One minute. 1 minute. But I have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps then that I could ask about the current discussions with the agricultural sector that were referenced earlier. I wonder if at the moment our agriculture workers, our small business owners, our farmers, and our industry representatives, are in contact with you and are able to provide you with comments and feedback as necessary at this time.
Appel au règlement, Madame la Présidente, il n'y a pas d'interprétation.
Point of order, the interpretation was not on.
La question en français pour,
I can do it in French. I think perhaps there's a lot of interruptions in your voice, and might be the signal is breaking up. Oh, sorry about that. Well, I'll ask the question in French, and I'll hope that everything goes through properly.
Ma question était à savoir.
So my question was as follows. In the agricultural sector, are producers and the other stakeholders in agriculture, were they able to provide comments as stakeholders to the negotiation team or the negotiators?
Question, Madam Chair, and yes, absolutely. Throughout the negotiating process, stakeholders were able to provide, agriculture stakeholders in particular, but all stakeholders were able to provide their concerns and raise any issues with me as the chief negotiator. As I mentioned, my door, my phone line are always wide open for stakeholders, and I would add that that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has a robust consultation process with its stakeholders as well. Now, just turn to my colleague, Mr. Fowler, to see if he has anything he would like to add to that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Forsyth, and thank you for the question, Madam Chair. We do have a robust suite of consultative tools that we use to engage with agriculture stakeholders in the context of all of our trade negotiations. We have as the primary interaction group called the Agricultural Trade Negotiations Consultative Group that we use to reach out to the cross-section of agricultural stakeholders in the country. We also engage closely with groups like the Canadian Agriculture Federation and CAFTA, the Canadian Agricultural Free Trade Alliance, individual industry associations, individual companies, and have done that consistently throughout discussions with the United Kingdom on a potential transitional agreement. So they are, I think, very engaged and up to speed on the nature of our discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fowler. On for 4 minutes, it'll be their last speaker, Mr. Hoback.
Well, thank you, Chair. Mr. Forsyth and Mr. Fowler, thank you guys for taking the stakeholders' calls. The question I have, though, is I can remember being back to WTO days when I was with wheat growers. We'd actually go to ministerial events during those negotiations where the ministers were sitting there listening to all the different stakeholders talk. Have you had any of those events?
Sorry, just to clarify the question, Madam Chair, any events that have any stakeholder events that have included ministers?
Yeah, like you did in WTO negotiations. Mr. Verhoeven, I can remember being at some with him. He'd be at the front of the stage and the minister would be sitting right next to him, and we all had a chance to listen to each other's point of view in a meeting type format. Now, I understand we can't meet in person, but we can do it over Zoom. So have you had any of those?
Fair enough. Thank you for the clarification. I think I better understand the question. I think that was certainly a different time, different scope. And I think for the consultations that we've had, as I said, both Mr. Fowler and I have had ongoing discussions with agriculture stakeholders. And I would add that agriculture cultural stakeholders have been very
You know,
engaged
Mr.
with our minister as well, the previous minister.
Mr. Forsyth, I don't
Minister Trade.
I've heard that from other agriculture guys. My concern is the minister hasn't. My concern that the political members haven't. It's the same concern I have with us looking at legislation. We haven't seen that all levels of government's been consulted. I'm glad you have been, because you're right in the heart of it. I'm glad that you have an open door. If you didn't have, there would have been no input into anything here. So I appreciate what you've done. But I have no proof here that the minister. So I look forward to seeing the minister here next week to ask her that question. The other question I have is in regards to the press releases that came out, or articles that came out from Bloomberg's and I think Canada Press saying that we're just days away, and this article was days ago. Where did that come from? And are we just days away, or, you know, how close is this thing? Because I think we've made our point very clear that timelines are ticking here. And how does a leak happen like that when it doesn't come to Parliament first?
Thanks for the question. I have seen the media reports, and the leaks did not come from the Canadian side that certainly that I'm aware of. I'm not sure where they came from, but as I mentioned in one of my previous answers, I'm quite confident that we can reach conclusion very shortly.
Okay. When we look at the agreement itself, was there any discussions with the EU saying, hey, UK is pulling out, we're actually going to take your TRQ and reduce it, and then take that amount and give it to UK?
So I think very early, thank you for the question, very early on in the discussions, we did have those kind of questions raised both by the UK and the EU. EU is very clear that with the UK leaving the European Union, that they would no longer be entitled to any of the TRQs as an EU member, and they would have to negotiate something with Canada.
But would they have access to the TRQ through their own agreement with the EU?
No, sorry, they have access to the TRQ now because they're in the transition out of it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is,
once they're out, they will have no access.
And they can't negotiate that access back in their agreement with the EU?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hoback. All right, thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Forsyth, and to all of the other witnesses today. Thank you for staying for the extra 20 minutes. We very much appreciate that. All right, okay, everything is done. I'm going to move adjournment. Thank you.